went in to Buckingham Palace a little earlier.
You can see the crowds of people gathering to witness this historic moment, trying to get that perfect picture as well. The pictures that you're looking at now are from when Rishi Sunak first entered Buckingham Palace after making that short trip from number 10 Downing Street, where he gave his resignation speech.
And we saw Commander Will Thornton come forward on behalf of the King to welcome the Prime Minister to the King's house. This is a routine that the Prime Minister is well used to when he came for his weekly audiences. Charter on this occasion coming. It's very traditional to be welcomed to by the King's Private Secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, into the King's door. And it's literally inside that door where the staircase stands that will take the Prime Minister from the Private Secretary's office up to the King's floor, which is the first floor, the principal floor, and it's at the back of the palace overlooking the gardens where the equerry will have opened the door when the King gave the signal and said, "The Prime Minister, Your Majesty." And the last time that Rishi Sunak would hear those words referring to him.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, the transfer of power. Historic. Only the second time it's happened in 27 years. Rishi Sunak conceding defeat at 4:42 a.m. this morning to the Labour Party in the landslide general election. He then travelled from his constituency in North Yorkshire down to number 10 Downing Street, where at around 10:40 this morning, he gave his resignation speech, accepting responsibility for one of the worst ever election performances by a Conservative party. He was flanked, of course, by his wife, Akshata, who was by his side, and then to Buckingham Palace, where the pair of them are now inside meeting the King.
I imagine it's still the King and the Prime Minister, and the process will be taking its form. And, of course, you know, there's much for the King to look back upon with the Prime Minister. The King, after all, invited Rishi Sunak to form a government as the King's second Prime Minister. And so this is the first Prime Minister resigning that the King has seen the entire period of premiership, and has undoubtedly privately been giving reassurance to his Prime Minister and listening, taking on those privileges of, as monarch, being allowed to warn, being kept informed, and to make sure that the King always was that private person who held the confidentiality that mattered so much. And I think, you know, it is a relationship like no other between head of state and Prime Minister. There's nowhere else really, apart perhaps from his wife, that the former Prime Minister, as he probably is now, would have been able to confide. And I think that the ending of that relationship, formally here at the moment, must be quite profound for both of them.
He, of course, as usual, decided to go to Buckingham Palace with his wife. Is it usually something that you've seen happen with just a husband and wife from number 10, or do they sometimes bring entire families with them? How does it normally work, Alistair?
Well, the King will have invited Rishi Sunak to bring whomsoever he would wish, I'm sure, because, as I say, there is the formal meeting, which is private, between the sovereign and the outgoing Prime Minister. But once that process is over and that pause arrives, then the King will press the buzzer and the equerry will bring in whomsoever the resigning Prime Minister has brought with them. And I think that, you know, that then becomes a very chatty time. You know, the King's very good at that. He's very self-effacing. He's got a twinkle and a sense of humour. And, you know, at these moments which are both historically profound, are still deeply human. And whatever your political view, the impact of this is really deep for an outgoing Prime Minister.
Yeah, you're going to need all of that charm from the King, aren't you? Because really it was, I guess, to be frank, a humiliation for Rishi Sunak last night. Probably the most difficult day of his life. How important do you think it is for the monarch to be able to put someone at ease in these most difficult of moments?
That's right. And I think for the King, who will by now have received that resignation and the advice from Rishi Sunak as to who, as King, he should send for as the next Prime Minister, you know, that period of office is over. But of course, it never ends for the King. And he will carry that executive power for a very brief time now. And it's not a comfortable place for a monarch to be holding that executive power for any longer than is absolutely necessary. And we know that the function of process will now be proceeding, and there will be an arrangement being made now by Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary, to make sure that the King's wish to call Sir Keir Starmer to come to the palace. You know, we're all supposed to believe they don't quite know why he's being called. But, you know, the truth is that this drama of our Constitution is in itself carrying out an executive continuance of power since the Middle Ages, right to today and right into the future, through the hands of the sovereign of the day. And that, I think, is why it works so well. It has its precedent, it has its purpose, and it has its poetry.
Poetry is a word, isn't it? I love you saying there about, you know, the drama of the unexpected call to the palace. I wonder if, like, anyone's ever been tempted to joke and just throw in a completely random name for the person that they've recommended to be the next Prime Minister. But it's the contrast, as you say, isn't it, between the kind of volatility of politics, and it has been very volatile recently, of course, and the stability of the monarchy.
Well, the King, by his nature, stands as a sense of continuity and is there to make sure that the deep keel of the nation passes through the stormy waters with continuity.
Oh, so is there anything symbolic that actually happens when we hear about kissing of rings or handing back of seals or documents of office? Is there actually any physical process?
Interestingly, no. What happens is that there's just this conversation. There are no seals for the office of Prime Minister. The office of Prime Minister, as you know, is relatively new and emerged by custom rather than anything else. In essence, what the office that's being handed over is that of First Lord of the Treasury, and that carries with it the responsibility of being Prime Minister. But literally a handshake and charm, I think, on both sides is all that's required. So no document is signed, no object is handed over, although when the King has received that resignation, it will be incumbent upon all the existing cabinet ministers to come and deliver up their seals to the King in the next day or so, maybe even later today.
And that will happen in person, will it?
That will happen in person. They will go to the King and they will each individually, all those cabinet ministers, including those who lost their seats, will go to the King and hand over their respective seals of office.
And do the incomers then turn up and pick them up as well?
Yes. So the first thing that would happen, of course, the King will invite Sir Keir Starmer to form a government. They may indeed, after that, have a conversation about who Sir Keir wants to appoint, because no one can be appointed a cabinet minister or a minister without the King's permission. Now, again, this is process, but it is one that is followed with immense courtesy. And then in due course, the King will receive each of those new ministers and deliver to them their seals of office. And from that point, they have power.
And where does the Privy Council fit into all this?
Well, the Privy Council, to a degree, runs that. But those who are not members of the Privy Council will have to be sworn. I'm going ahead of myself here, but assuming Sir Keir Starmer chooses to be a minister, somebody who is not yet a Privy Councillor, they will have to be sworn of the Privy Council in order to proceed to receive their seals of office.
And Penny Mordaunt, who was President of the Council, no longer an MP. What happens to her?
She still is Lord President of the Council, so she will need to deliver up her seal of office to the King as Lord President of the Council. And in due course, we will find out who the new Prime Minister chooses to appoint as Lord President, and he or she will then go and see the King and receive the seals of office at that time.
So quite busy for the King, really.
This is, some might say, all unnecessary. There are plenty of people out there I know who think this is all complete flummery. But, you know, it's a process of, I suppose, a political pause as the Constitution takes its effect and makes sure that on all of our behalves, the sovereign passes power tidily from one administration to the next.
You say a pause, but it's a brief pause.
It's very brief indeed. Very brief indeed. But, you know, I think that the King is at the moment playing his part as the father of the nation and reassuring the Prime Minister who has just demitted office.
We're just going to have another look at that journey, the final journey that Rishi Sunak will make as Prime Minister, holding the hand of his wife at Charter after giving, I'm almost certain, the most difficult political speech of his life, as they make their way to the car and that journey to go and see the King. And then after that, I guess, the beginning of the rest of their lives, the final journey as Prime Minister.
Where does power lie now, Alistair?
The King is, of course, King, and he holds executive power. And if you think about it, even when the new Prime Minister is appointed, he is the King's Prime Minister, and the ministers will form His Majesty's government. So he is the guardian, as it were, of the power, but he passes it, because we have cabinet government, to the cabinet to exercise it on his behalf. I don't know how much people are aware, but the monarch never signs at the base of a document. A document that carries effect always has the signature at the base of the document of the Minister of the Crown, who takes responsibility for it, and the monarch signs at the top. And it's a sign that always the monarch, who constitutionally can do no wrong, if he gives effect to something, it's always following a Minister of the Crown who is answerable either at the dispatch box of the House of Commons or occasionally at the House of Lords for the decisions or the advice they've given the King.
But their own decrees, they do sign at the bottom, right?
That's slightly different. That is a proclamation. But then, you know, no monarch makes a proclamation unless he has taken advice, probably from the Privy Council. So the Privy Council gives the King the clearance to use his prerogative. And, you know, for Rishi Sunak, as he now is, the former Prime Minister, the former 57th Prime Minister, arriving earlier on at Buckingham Palace, and you'll notice they've raked the gravel in the palace, which they do every day, and it does make it all look and sound that little bit more special when you come and see your sovereign.
Probably a little bit more effort put into making it extra perfect today, when they know those cameras are going to be on the gravel as well. Alistair, can I ask you, what happens after the meeting? Is that it? Does Rishi Sunak just leave and get on with the rest of his life? Is there any other formalities that he has to go through?
No, because once Rishi Sunak has handed over executive power that he was given by the King back to the King, and the conversation with Charter as well has taken place, the King will press his bell again, the equerry will magically appear at the door, and the equerry will lead out Mr and Mrs Sunak, as it were. You know that it is over. And then I'm sure that he'll be taken downstairs, maybe another quick chat with Sir Clive Alderton. Sir Clive, of course, lets the equerry act as the King's representative of welcoming and seeing people off from the premises. But, of course, Sir Clive is responsible for the King of managing the monarchy and its interrelationships with the 15 nations' governments, of which the King is head of state. And, of course, this is the principal one here in the United Kingdom. So it is the ending of two quite important relationships that, for the period of which Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, that are they were very important to him.
Will a drink be taken or a cup of coffee at any point? We know Keir Starmer's a teetotaler, but Rishi Sunak's a teetotaler. Keir Starmer likes a can of beer. I mean, will there be either of those there?
I think it's highly unlikely because I think that, this is a business meeting and the palace tends to operate on delivering certain things at certain times. And I think that the presumption might be, there's always stuff there, but I would imagine that that might not be the case today. And I think that it's more likely at 12 o'clock that the drinks might be available, but I still think that might be deemed by the king a tad early.
A bit earlier, Adam. It's only 11:17.
And anyway, I think that presuming the king, and I'm now entering the performance of the Constitution, presuming the king calls upon Sir Keir Starmer, I would imagine the last thing on his mind is having a drink after a night like he has had. He will be wanting to get on with a job on the king's behalf of leading the nation.
What do we know about their personal relations, Keir Starmer and the king?
Well, the king will make sure that the relationship is perfect. The king is very good at engaging with people. He has this very charming, easy style. But remember, Sir Keir Starmer, as leader of His Majesty's opposition, was at the state banquet only recently when the Emperor and Empress of Japan came over. And, every time there are major events, the leader of the opposition, as in essence Sir Keir Starmer still is at the moment, will have been present. And, the king will have... The king knows that this is an important relationship. And I think it's very interesting that at the state banquet, Sir Clive Alderton was sat next to Sir Keir Starmer. And I thought that was very interesting because, that builds up that relationship, which will be key.
But presumably the king does know him because of the knighthood, because he was head of the Department of Public Prosecutions. There's a sort of back history to a certain extent.
Yes, but remember that was predominantly in the reign of Elizabeth II. So, of course, as Prince of Wales, he may well have met him. They have built up over time through the inevitability of Sir Keir being at the top of British public life. There have been developments of that relationship. But I think what we're going to see, and what every Prime Minister claims in their description, is that monarchs have this totally special relationship with their Prime Minister. And it is fed by the whole process, not only of government, but also of the palace, to be a place of safety for the Prime Minister, where some of the most difficult... again, looking back through history, for Elizabeth II and George VI and George V, these relationships were key at difficult times.
If you're just joining us, we can tell you now that Rishi Sunak is currently in Buckingham Palace. We believe he's probably already offered his resignation as Prime Minister to the King. He's currently in there with his wife, ex-Charter, talking to the King. Shortly afterwards, it will be the turn of Sir Keir Starmer. Politics in the UK, fast and brutal. He'll be travelling to Buckingham Palace, asking to form the next government, where he will again meet the King. A busy morning, a busy constitutional morning here at Buckingham Palace, where Rishi Sunak and his wife ex-Charter are currently meeting with the King. Alistair, can I ask, what happens if there is some kind of national crisis or a decision that needs to be made, in the next half hour or so? Constitutionally, there's no Prime Minister.
Well, constitutionally, there still is cabinet, because although many of them have lost their seats, the cabinet that did exist still exists until such time as they deliver up their seals of office to the King. I think that we're looking now at a departure from Buckingham Palace. It is probably it's difficult for me to define exactly who it is, but I think out of the side door from Buckingham Palace may well be the departure of Rishi Sunak. I'm afraid I can't see, but it would be very normal for a demitting Prime Minister to want to leave and get out of the way as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and the convoy would suggest as well that it's a senior figure.
So we're guessing, we believe that is probably the departure of Rishi Sunak, sparing the glares of the cameras with those tinted windows in the Land Rover as he pulls away from Buckingham Palace.
Heading back to where he has his London home, towards Kensington.
And that's it?
That is it. He has ceased being the 57th Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the King's second. It is now for him to ponder and reflect. But in the palace, you know, business must move on. And the King will have given the indication that he would like Sir Keir Starmer to come and visit him at Buckingham Palace. Again, this is a constitutional performance. We know that's going to happen. But in history, for the King's mother, Elizabeth II, there were often terribly difficult times for her when she had to make a decision between two powerful people in whichever party held the confidence of the House of Commons. And, you know, most of that challenging problem has been taken away through constitutional tweaks. But right now, Sir Clive Alderton, on behalf of the King, on the King's command, will have sent a message inviting Sir Keir Starmer, who is quite clearly the person who the sovereign can choose to form a new administration.
Well, a quick breath for King Charles before the constitutional duties move on. He has had that important meeting with Rishi Sunak. He is now, of course, preparing to meet Sir Keir Starmer. These are the pictures here of the King arriving at Buckingham Palace earlier in the day, ready, of course, for a very important constitutional day for him at Buckingham Palace, where he was meeting not only, of course, the outgoing Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who has just left Buckingham Palace with his wife, Akshata, but also, of course, preparing for that meeting with the new King, new Prime Minister, I should say, Sir Keir Starmer.
And we saw the King there travelling with Sir Clive Alderton, his principal private secretary. So, you know, reminding us that although the King came from Windsor on his own to Clarence House, he was there briefed by his private secretary and then travelled with his private secretary, demonstrating this is a key constitutional time and coming into the palace. But the former Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, then arrived in the quadrangle. You see the state entrance behind where carriage processions start, but at the King's door on the right side. It was the King's door because most recently it used to have just to the left of the door the King's office, and so it was regarded as the King's door. Queen Elizabeth II moved her office elsewhere in the building, but it is still where, quite close by, Sir Clive Alderton has his office, where Prime Ministers always go first. So that is where the meeting would have started before the King was ready. And anyway, that administration is at an end.
We have just had the official statement through from Buckingham Palace. They have said the Right Honourable Rishi Sunak MP had an audience of the King this morning and tendered his resignation as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury, which His Majesty was graciously pleased to accept. So there you have it, it is official. We've had the statement from Buckingham Palace that Rishi Sunak tendered his resignation as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury, and of course, His Majesty King Charles graciously pleased to accept. Preparations, I'm sure now, Alistair, for the next meeting on the King's agenda. I have to say, it's interesting, isn't it, that you were saying before that these are very private conversations, but we have had a couple of times when previous Prime Ministers have let slip some of the details. Sir Tony Blair once recalled how he tripped on a rug and practically fell into the Queen's hands when he went to the palace to be appointed in 1997.
Well, I think that there have been occasions when Prime Ministers have chosen to share information, but I think we all noticed that Elizabeth II never shared any information. And I think every time Prime Ministers do share any comment about their private times with the monarch as sovereign and head of government, it's moderately disapproved of by the United Kingdom's people generally. I think we all accept that the unique nature of the fact that we have a head of state who is hereditary and a descendant of the people about which Shakespeare wrote, has its advantage, but that there is also this constant, vibrant, lively office of Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury, which is occupied by people who are at the frantic forefront of political squabble, and that relationship needs to have a space in which to flourish. And the best place for that to flourish is in private.
Yeah, I think there was a general view, wasn't there, that Sri Blair was perhaps prone to share too much information.
Well, I think that, Elizabeth II never complained about anything like that, but I dare say her various private secretaries might have rung up the then private secretary to prime ministers and said, I wonder if we could just draw back on comments like that. I remember the purring comment, which came out after the referendum. Yes,
Scottish
and
referendum.
I think that was, unhelpful. I don't even identify it as an expression that I recall the Queen making. I don't remember her purring. I don't think many people remember her purring.
Fantastic image there, wasn't it?
Well, but again, I think that there was a view that he'd stepped out of line, and that mattered.
And the danger of it as well, because obviously a monarchy that is so careful to not stray into political territory. And today, I think, really shows why that matters, because they do have this immense constitutional power that can't be abused.
And I do think if we look, for those of you who've been with Sky News for the last however many hours, this is a constitutional pause. It's a very peaceful time in what has been a very frantic night. And what we can be absolutely certain, the moment the King has offered executive government to Sir Keir Starmer, the moment he leaves the palace, the frantic nature of what is going to happen and the establishment of his administration with, of course, the approval of the King, and then the politics of watching the after effects of an election. But just in this quiet time with Buckingham Palace as that continuous backdrop to British life, there is a chance to see the constitutional power working, and it's being done by the King on behalf of us all, we having made the national choice.
It's true, it's a pause, isn't it, as you say, after the chaos and the frenzy and the drama of the election night for us here in the studio as well. We can cross now live to Buckingham Palace, where our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills is standing by. Rhiannon.
Well, it's been fascinating listening to your discussions, as I have to say I've been reflecting on the fact that Rishi Sunak and his wife were just a few moments ago enjoying what would have been a moment of peace inside that audience room with the King. Of course, after all of the noise and the frantic activity after the last 6 weeks, that's overnight going to the Count and then this morning having to deliver that speech outside Downing Street, and then Rishi Sunak made that final journey, didn't he, to Buckingham Palace as Prime Minister, and then I suspect had at least a moment to breathe with a man that he has spent a great deal of time with and around since he became Prime Minister back at the end of 2022. Of course, for the King, Rishi Sunak was his second Prime Minister, and at a difficult time for the King, just, 5-6 weeks after Queen Elizabeth II had died. So it's interesting to try and reflect on the kind of relationship that those two men will have developed over the last year or so. Of course, you would think a very personal relationship at times when you think back to the start of this year, where the King had to announce that he'd been diagnosed with cancer. And actually we were given a rare insight really into the kind of meeting that the Prime Minister and the Monarch have every week, as a camera was invited in for that first audience after the King announced that he'd been diagnosed with cancer. Of course, we often have to guess exactly what that relationship is like between the two men. The King, of course, isn't meant to show any kind of favouritism towards anybody, but it does seem that they did develop this close relationship, as is so important. I would argue that when we see Keir Starmer very soon arriving here at Buckingham Palace, it is going to be the start of forming probably one of the most important relationships that he will have during his premiership. His cabinet ministers may come and go, his staff may come and go, but the monarch is seen to be a constant, and they have those weekly audiences. Certainly, people about Queen Elizabeth II talked about, well, Queen Elizabeth II herself during the documentary Elizabeth R talked about how prime ministers would come to her every week and she would feel that they would unburden themselves, that sometimes she would be able to make them maybe think about an issue in a different way. So much was made about Queen Elizabeth and her experience, but actually it's important to remember how much experience our current king has, as after all of those decades as heir on the world stage in terms of dealing with those matters of state. But yeah, he's now said farewell to his second prime minister and now awaits the arrival of his third.
And Rhiannon, we're trying to, I guess, gauge the level of excitement, enthusiasm about the new Labour government. We're looking at pictures of Buckingham Palace. We can see the kind of crowds gathering around the building. What is the atmosphere like there? Is it tourists? Is it people who are there to try and witness a bit of history in front of them?
It's always a really busy time of day, this, because the tourists tend to turn up to expect to witness guard change, but of course it's a different kind of changeover that they're witnessing today, and certainly lots of people have been stopping to ask what exactly is going on, because we have seen, and I think it's important on these days that we see this kind of drama. It adds to the theatre, seeing the king coming and going, seeing the outgoing prime minister and the incoming prime minister having that important audience here. I think what people will make a lot of, probably in the next coming days, is what kind of relationship are Keir Starmer and the monarch going to have. It's worth pointing out that this is certainly not going to be anywhere near the first time that Keir Starmer and the king have met. Of course, as leader of the opposition, they've spent a great deal of time together at those big moments of national celebration or commemoration. D-Day, for example, the state visit last week. But also it's interesting to say that it was back in 2014 that actually the then Prince Charles knighted Sir Keir Starmer. Also, I think many people will point to the fact that maybe the two men are potentially more aligned on certain social issues. Of course, when it comes to Queen Elizabeth II, we didn't know very much about her views. We had a very long time when Prince Charles was heir to get to know exactly what he thought of the world around him. So when it comes to issues around the environment, housing, help for young people, people may suggest that potentially Keir Starmer and him are going to be more aligned. Although, of course, if you talk to the palace, they will very clearly say that the monarch must remain above politics. But you do wonder what kind of conversations the monarch and Keir Starmer are likely to have as they build that relationship over the coming weeks and months.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. Rhiannon Mills there at Buckingham Palace. If you are just joining us, the King has accepted the resignation of Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. Buckingham Palace issuing a statement a little earlier to say the Right Honourable Rishi Sunak MP had an audience with the King this morning and tendered his resignation as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury, which His Majesty was graciously pleased to accept. I'm joined by Alistair Bruce, our royal commentator. We're awaiting the arrival of Sir Keir Starmer.
Yes, it's a wonderful process as we see the end of one administration and the start of the next, handled quite beautifully by Buckingham Palace's process. And it's a way of giving legitimacy to this transfer of power, doing it through the head of state. And we initially witness one Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury offering a resignation. He's now gone. And then we await the person who holds the confidence of the House of Commons, who quite clearly is Sir Keir Starmer after that extraordinary success at the general election last night. So the King has no difficulty in knowing that that is the man who is going to offer the opportunity to form a government. Now, we all know he will accept, but we have to wait for Sir Keir Starmer to accept. Many people have gone to see sovereigns and have been unsure. There was an occasion when Sir Alec Douglas-Home was asked, and he asked the late Queen for permission to go off and just try and make sure that he could secure the opportunity of a government. But of course, that's not going to be the difficulty here, and I'm sure Sir Keir Starmer, with dignity, will immediately accept the request, and at that point, he will become Prime Minister, literally the moment he says yes. The palace will give out another statement where it will say that the king had asked him to form a government and that he did, and then it'll probably go on to say, and that he kissed hands upon appointment. He will do no such thing. There is no kissing of hands. It is just an ancient, well, it's a sort of 17th, 18th century reference to an act of deference to the monarch of the day. The king will not require that in any way at all. They'll then just have a conversation. But what the king needs to know now, as head of state, is an indication, perhaps of the intent of Sir Keir Starmer at his first King's speech, which, of course, the king will give on the 17th of July. The king will, of course, read it, but it will be a chance for the king to find out from his new Prime Minister what the intention of that first session of the Parliament will involve. And the other thing is that the king will want to know who Sir Keir Starmer has in mind for all the appointments in the cabinet. They are the king's ministers. It is only when the king has approved their names can they be announced to us. And of course, I don't know, maybe Sir Keir has already been discussing it with his members of Parliament as they approach the election. I've no idea. I mean, that's something that Sam may know much more about than I do. But in the end, some of them say no to being appointed. Some of them say, oh, I wanted something better than that. All sorts of stuff like that happens. But ultimately, no announcement can be made to us until the king has said, yes, I'm happy for that person to be a Secretary of State.
I love it. So it's the king who gets the first glimpse, then, of the incoming cabinet.
He doesn't need to watch Sky News, I can tell you that. And also all the other ministers, and there are many at different levels, who will need to have their names passed by the king. I remember being told that once the Queen was out having lunch at Balmoral, and the list was read over a radio to a policeman who then came in to the Queen and showed her the list, and she approved it, and the message was sent back. So, you know, wherever the monarch is, this courtesy and recognition of the role. This is the king's government, His Majesty's government. And whilst executive power is quite rightly not in the king's own hands to exercise, it is still conceptually his, and he gives it to be exercised by cabinet government because we as a nation have developed that as an effective way of maintaining the way we're ruled.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, we are, of course, looking at pictures of Buckingham Palace. We are also looking at pictures of number 10 Downing Street, because we have seen already one speech from the outgoing Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and the incoming Prime Minister is due to make his. Beth Rigby is there. Beth, I can see you've got your brolly up.
I have. It's absolutely bucketing it down. It's just started. And it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because Keir Starmer said, didn't he, earlier, walk into the morning into the sunlight of hope. I have to say, Sophie, there's not much sunlight around here at the moment. But what's happening now in the street is a number of Labour staffers were gathering. I think there was going to be quite a crowd for when Keir Starmer comes into the street. And I think when he does come in, I expect the tone of the speech will be rather like how he ran the campaign, where he will talk about putting the country and government, putting the government back into the service of working people. I think he will try and signal that he wants to govern with a sense of urgency and focus, rather like the campaign they ran. And he will want to hit the ground running. I think they are acutely aware that they have won a majority, a massive majority, on a very low vote share. It's astonishing, actually, Sophie, that Starmer in 2024 has won 33.8% of the vote, and that has garnered him 412 seats and a majority of 168. Jeremy Corbyn won more votes than Keir Starmer in 2019 when he led the Labour Party to its worst defeat since 1935. Starmer's picked up 9.7 million votes. Corbyn picked up 10.2. And what does that tell us? It goes back to what we've been talking about in the final days of this campaign, that Starmer might have broad support, but it's shallow. and he's not carrying the whole country with him, far from it. 9.7 million people is not the majority or even 40% of the British voting population. And I think what he and his team are acutely aware with is when they come into number 10, they have to quite quickly in that first 100 days show people that they mean business and that a Labour government does really mean change. It's not just rhetoric, it's not just words. And I think you're going to see a flurry of activity. I imagine that the Cabinet will come up here later. They'll probably have a Cabinet meeting over the weekend. He's going to NATO, to Washington next week. I imagine we're going to have a big housing announcement before term closes. And I also understand that Labour are going to extend Parliament. It had been due to rise kind of towards the end of July, shortly after the King's speech, which happens on the 17th of July. That's when the government sets out their legislative agenda. They're going to run it until the end of July and then come back right bang on early September, September the 2nd. So they're crunching down a parliamentary recess in order to get going in the business of governing.
Really interesting to see what he decides to say when he does arrive at number 10 as Prime Minister. Beth, I've got to ask you as well. I do remember being down there with you in the rain when Rishi Sunak gave his speech announcing the election as the kind of heavens opened above him and the kind of wet jacket. Have they got a backup plan if it's raining when Keir Starmer makes his speech?
I think it's fair to say that the Labour team around Keir Starmer during that campaign looked on with horror when they saw a Prime Minister getting drenched on the steps of Downing Street saying he had a plan and then being teased for many weeks after about not having an umbrella, and they certainly won't put the new Prime Minister into that position. You'll remember, Sophie, that actually Keir Starmer, whilst Rishi Sunak was getting drenched, did his election announcement speech in a room that looked rather like a Prime Minister briefing room. Do you remember it, with the wood panelling and the Union Jacks? I don't think that they will risk him coming out and getting drenched. They might give him an umbrella and he might come out and do it here, but I guess they can also take the option of trying to wait a little bit for the rain to stop. It actually has stopped now. But no, I don't think Keir Starmer will be coming to the street drenched. And actually, there is a more serious point in that, which is the way that Labour have run this campaign is with precision. Keir Starmer's top people have been out on the trail with him every single day. They check the shots, they check the journalists, they check everyone's holding their signs up the right way. And these are all small things, but they speak to a bigger picture, which is that they wanted to be very professional, and they, having lost 4 elections on the bounce, did not want to have any self-enforced errors. And I think that they will take that approach into government as well. Now, how successful they will be is another question entirely. As I was saying, the mandate in terms of the proportion of the vote is so much lower than a Tony Blair got in '97, or indeed a Boris Johnson got in 2019. And really, this election, as much as it is a victory of Keir Starmer's, I don't want to take anything away from that. He is undoubtedly the most successful Labour leader since Tony Blair. He's on par with Attlee in terms of the kind of majority he's delivering, and he could become a very consequential Prime Minister for this country if he can turn this victory into meaningful change. So I don't want to take away from it, but the fact the vote share is so low, and the fact it also comes on the back of an abject rejection by the British people of the Conservative government, and the votes have split every which way. It's not like Conservative voters are flipping to Labour. They've gone every which way. They're going to reform. The Greens have picked up votes. The Lib Dems have had an absolutely stonking night, taken, I think it was about 70 seats from memory. So this is a situation where Keir Starmer not only has to hold on to those Tories that perhaps lent him their vote because they were fed up, he has to also try and win support from the other political parties where voters did not come to Labour, they went to the others. And I do think a theme of this election is the rise of the other, the rise of the other party. The other thing I would say is Labour are very alive to the threat of reform. Nigel Farage talked about how he's going for Labour. They see it as a serious threat. They worry about populism. They worry about disaffection, disillusionment, and people feeling that politics is broken and Britain doesn't work for them. And they know that they have to tackle that. And if they don't, it is at their peril, because if they don't tackle it, all that will happen is reform will grow and really begin to eat into their support. So I think that that might be a theme of his speech too.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Beth. Good to see you got a brolly with you, always prepared. Beth Rigby there in Downing Street. Well, if you're joining us now, we currently don't have a Prime Minister after the King accepted the resignation of Rishi Sunak after that record-breaking loss for the Conservative Party. We'll, of course, be following Keir Starmer from his home in Kentish Town, where he might have had a few moments' rest before his big day, a few cups of coffee, perhaps, before entering the most important moment of his life. He will become the 58th Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. You can see there some Labour supporters gathering in Downing Street. They've got their Union Jack brollies up, awaiting to hear Sir Keir Starmer's first real pitch to the public as Prime Minister. It will come, of course, after he meets the King. But it's a difficult needle for him to thread because he has just won an enormous majority, but on a lower vote share than David Cameron managed in 2010, than Jeremy Corbyn managed as well. It's going to be an interesting and difficult challenge for him to bring that country together. We've got Sam Coates, our Deputy Political Editor, with us. It's going to be a big moment for him.
A huge moment. A moment after a campaign which actually saw the Labour vote share go down. You're looking now at some of Keir Starmer's team starting to approach Downing Street and line the edges of Downing Street. The shot that you can see has Downing Street on the Downing Street number 10 on the left, and you can see this new number 10, this incoming number 10, wanting to convey visually some of the excitement that they will feel, and they hope that some in the public feel at this moment where Labour come into power with a majority of about 168, which gives Keir Starmer effectively a political blank cheque for 5 years to enact reform on the back of a manifesto that promises the biggest of changes in broad brush terms, but the smallest of specifics in terms of individual policies. Keir Starmer promised change. The question now is, what does change look like and how does he get there? Huge number of things for Keir Starmer to do in the coming minutes and hours. Appoint his internal top team, appoint his cabinet, take opening calls from world leaders and some of those security briefings. But first, the formality of the King and the appointment, which comes in the next hour.
And they're really strong vibes here, looking at these pictures of the images of 1997, Alistair nodding along there, those of us who remember it. And you know, one of the things that obviously hasn't really been focused on in this campaign has been the extent of the organisation of the Labour team. Pat McFadden, of course, been at the middle of that. And, you know, they will have, I know, because I've had messages from people saying, I know so-and-so's going in. They have actually cleared who the people they are that they, you know, want lining the street. They want quite a lot of children. And you can see, too, that probably judging by the weather this summer, they had prepared for the need of umbrellas. I mean, it's not an accident that they've got Union Jack umbrellas there. That is the image which this new Labour government is looking for to get out.
Although I think there's just a touch less exuberance than we saw in 1997.
Oh, definitely.
Back then,
Yeah,
there was there was an extraordinary moment at dawn with Tony Blair outside the Royal Festival Hall declaring new dawn has broken. Now, there was an equivalent event today, but it passed with much less notice. It was Keir Starmer declaring that hope was coming in Tate Modern, but there was no sense of place, there was no sense of moment in the same way. So here is, you can see the start of the Labour team trying to create a moment, create a sense of excitement, and create momentum that they want to carry through today for the many, many hours left that Keir Starmer has of work to do.
And perhaps less a new dawn breaking than a brief pause in the rain for Sir Keir Starmer to go and deliver his first speech as Prime Minister after, of course, that all-important meeting with the King. Just looking at the number of people lining the streets of Downing Street, you can really get a sense of the changing of the guard. You know, this does not happen often, a real changing of power that we are witnessing playing out before us on Downing Street. Beth Rippey is there. Beth, what can you see?
Well, yeah, there are people gathering. Sorry, so I'm just going to grab this safe because it's very good. I can see a lot of people gathering. I can see actually some advisors in there. I think that these are perhaps staffers. A baby is coming up the street. It is Sir Keir Starmer's vision of Tony Blair's new dawn. And they want to make this celebratory. And I think that while we've talked a lot about the challenges that Keir Starmer will face, we should also take in just the scale of the achievement that he has got in this victory. He is only the second Labour leader to win a majority in this country in half a century. He is knocking on the door of Tony Blair in terms of that massive majority, just coming in slightly behind Tony Blair on his 179 majority. He deserves a day to celebrate, and I think that these staffers, as I said, that have worked in the Labour Party, they went through the Corbyn years, they suffered 4 defeats on the bounce, then they had 2019 and an 80-seat Conservative majority, perhaps thought they were out of power for a decade or more. It has been hard yards. It's awful being in opposition. You have to work really hard, but you don't get to affect change. So I think that they're gathering partly because they want to share the moment and they want to celebrate the moment. And I think what we will get, despite the rain, is when Keir Starmer comes up the street and he stands and he makes his speech, and he makes his speech in front of his team, I think there will be a sense of optimism and joy. I think that they are allowed to have a day of joy. They daren't have dreamt this. 5 years ago, they really were in the doldrums, the worst defeat since 1935, a country that had turned its back on Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, and Keir Starmer had some very difficult times in those early years of leadership. You'll remember Hartlepool, when Boris Johnson won it in a by-election, a key red wall seat. Keir Starmer thought about resigning. There was another by-election, Batley and Spen, later that year. I remember I was there, and Kim Leadbeater only narrowly won that by-election. And I remember seeing Keir Starmer that morning, and he was overjoyed because he knew that losing that by-election could have triggered a leadership question or even race around him. So he has hung on by a thread at some points as Labour leader. It has been a mountain to climb. And he wakes up this morning, and yes, it is raining, although I think there might be, dare I believe it, some sun. But he has woken up this morning and he has scaled Everest. It's an incredible achievement. And whilst, yes, the vote share is low and the support base might be shallow and reform is on the rise and the Lib Dems are having a really good run and back into the third position, he has won a majority that if he uses it wisely, he could be one of the most consequential prime ministers this country has seen. He could go down in history on the lines of... Someone's filming them and they're having a little cheer. But along the lines of Attlee, of Thatcher, of Tony Blair. So it's a huge achievement. And they're here to watch it and to celebrate.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Beth. We are seeing the changing of the guard in Downing Street playing out before our eyes. This morning, it was Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt in there. They both cleared out now. Rishi Sunak having his resignation with the King accepted, and now it is the new guard, those around Sir Keir Starmer, awaiting his arrival at number 10 after, of course, he makes that trip to Buckingham Palace. In many ways, nothing can prepare you for being Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, running the CPS. Nothing can prepare you for being the 57th Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And you can see there the very carefully choreographed welcome party outside number 10. Some babies there, some kids, some advisors, some carefully chosen Union Jack umbrellas. We believe this may be Sir Keir Starmer arriving at Buckingham Palace.
How about that?
And on behalf of the King, Sir Keir Starmer is welcomed into the King's Door of Buckingham Palace by the Equerry and Sir Clive Alderton. They'll go to Sir Clive's office initially. It's a few minutes before 12 o'clock. I would imagine that the King's audience will start at 12, but I expect that there will be a chance for Sir Keir, who is going to be playing his part, to talk with the private secretary first.
His wife Victoria, of course, accompanying him. And I have to say, I think there was probably a bit of a statement in that very modest vehicle bringing him into the grandeur of Buckingham Palace.
Just to say thank you to all of you who've been watching on Sky Showcase. We will continue our full coverage of the election results on Sky News as we wait for Sir Keir Starmer to meet the King. He has just arrived at Buckingham Palace.
How about that?
It is 12 o'clock and Sir Keir Starmer has just entered Buckingham Palace, where he will meet the King, and when he leaves this building, he will have become the 58th Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He will make that trip to Downing Street, he will form the next government, and he is expected to address the nation shortly on the steps of number 10 after winning a landslide majority for the Labour Party. If you're just joining us, these were the seat totals: 412 seats for the Labour Party, just shy of that historic majority in 1997. The Conservatives losing more seats than in any other election since the party was formed. And that's why behind that door later on, it will be Sir Keir Starmer who is forming the next government. The man with the mandate, the man with the majority, although, of course, it was on a relatively low vote share. Not that they care, the people who are waiting to hear the speech. from the next Prime Minister?
So for Sir Keir, who is now with Sir Clive Alderton waiting for the King to call for Sir Keir to come up for an audience. Of course, it's quite special because the equerry who will take him, we saw him in naval uniform welcoming on behalf of the King, for Lieutenant Commander Will Thornton. He will go to the King's door at the audience room and he'll walk in and say, "Sir Keir Starmer, Your Majesty," and then let Sir Keir go in. The door will close. And when Sir Keir comes out, he will be able to say, "Congratulations, Prime Minister," as the first person who can do it. It's always been a tradition for the equerry that should be very special. And this is obviously another page in history. For the Labour Party, it's significant because the King's great-grandfather, King George V, in 1924, exactly 100 years ago, sent for the first Labour Prime Minister in Ramsay MacDonald. It would have been a delight for Ramsay MacDonald to have the kind of majority that Sir Keir can present before the King today. Of course, poor old Ramsay MacDonald only had a minority government, but it was a significant moment because King George V had to allow the new Labour politicians to come and see him not in formal dress because they didn't have it. And of course, all those things seem ridiculous, but it was in its own way such a major moment culturally and socially for King George V in those days. And yet today there's a huge change again in the nation in the recognition of a change of will from the people. And the King is acting on all of our behalf by very shortly sending for his new Prime Minister. And of course, when Sir Keir goes into the King, after the usual charm and welcome and a few little jokes perhaps just to set Sir Keir completely at his ease, the King will brace himself up and formally ask whether Sir Keir would be able to form an administration. The moment Sir Keir says yes, he becomes the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and First Lord of the Treasury. And then the conversation will move on to, I believe, the choice of people for his cabinet. Ultimately, the King must approve of all of them, cabinet first and then the ministers, but also because a parliament is made up of a series of sessions, most of them lasting a year each with a state opening of parliament. The first session, we know, will have a state opening of parliament on the 17th of July. And for that, there will be a King's speech prepared. So this is a chance for Sir Keir to lay out to the King what he wants to do first in that first session of legislative change. And so I think it's a very interesting time for the King as head of state, representing all of us by keeping the nation and its history guiding forward, to have this chance to talk and to make that extraordinary invitation to form a government.
It is an extraordinary invitation, isn't it? And that's exactly the way to put it. It's an important relationship as well going forward, isn't it? I'm always struck by how every Prime Minister talks about their relationship with the monarch. How do you think that the King will get on with Keir Starmer? I remember Keir Starmer, of course, has spoken about wanting to abolish the monarchy in his younger days. I'm sure he doesn't hold that opinion anymore.
Well, people can hold whatever view they like. And that's the great thing about this democracy. There are plenty of people out there who are not happy that we are a monarchy and want something different. But, this is a time when that relationship between the head of state, the King, and the new head of government, when he is appointed Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, will be vital because it is the only place Sir Keir will be able to go where he's not being challenged and requested for things. I think one of the truly treasuring things about the relationship that a Prime Minister has with the King is that the King has got nothing to gain from a Prime Minister, whereas a Prime Minister is the source of all patronage on behalf of the sovereign. And everyone who comes up to or who engages with the Prime Minister has their own agenda, their own desire. Even to get a photograph with him is taking something from the Prime Minister. But with the King, that is the only person that is not able to gain anything from a Prime Minister. And I think that creates a special relationship. And the fact that it's always in private is important. But also, once the formality is over, and I would imagine that Sir Keir is now with the King, and if I was a betting man, and I know none of us are allowed to be betting people now, I would imagine that the King will right now be posing that question. Would you be prepared to form a government? And in the instant, which none of us are flies on the wall to hear, that Sir Keir says yes, I imagine in this moment he is becoming the 58th Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
It must be such an extraordinary moment to hear that question. I'm sure it's a question that he's thought about, perhaps never allowed himself to think about too much, just in case. We can go to Downing Street now, because we can see, Beth, lots of flags being waved, lots of cheering going on.
Yes, this is interesting, Sophie. You can see that flags of Scotland, a Union Jack, and the Welsh flag are all being dished out to the activists and the supporters and the party members. And the reason that this is interesting is that one of the themes when I've been talking to Starmer's team has been that they were very keen to win a majority in which they were governing for all three nations where they had fielded candidates. And what that meant was that they would, by seat numbers and vote share, be the biggest party in England, Scotland and Wales. Now, this last happened under, guess who? Tony Blair in 2001. And they've done it again. And I think the flags represent what Starmer wants to portray, which is he is a Prime Minister that will govern for everyone. And also he said he's a Prime Minister that will govern for those who didn't support him either. And one of his key people said to me the other day that when he did become Labour leader in 2020, and at the time Labour had one seat in Scotland, you remember the Labour wipeout of 2015 when they were just eclipsed, eviscerated by the SNP, that Starmer had made a point of saying, I don't want to govern, I need Labour to govern just two nations of the UK. I don't want Labour to be a force in two nations. I want it to be a force in three nations. Of course, in Northern Ireland, Labour don't field seats, field candidates. And actually change the Labour leadership in Scotland and put Anas Sarwar in. And we've seen the huge success that they have had in Scotland overnight. So the flags sort of have a deeper meaning, if you like, which is part of a wider strategy that Labour had to want to be able to claim that they were governing for all of the nations, or the three nations where they have fielded candidates.
I have to say, just looking at the image of those people, carefully selected, I'm sure, with the flags lining the streets of Downing Street, it does feel quite reminiscent of 97, doesn't it? You know, those images of Tony Blair walking down the street, shaking people's hands as he went to the steps of number 10 to talk directly to the nation. Do you think that's deliberate?
Yeah, and I think also, like, lots of these people the cameras are asking them to wave. We're all collecting footage there for our TV reports later today. The cameras have been asking them to wave the flags. That's probably going to be a picture going into many a broadsheet and a red top tomorrow. But, you know, some of these people as well, they are activists, they are people that work for the party. They're people I've actually seen about on the campaign trail, and I can see some of Starmer's top team are now coming around the street and they're eyeing it all up and they're making sure it's just so. And I can see a lot of his key team now all in position waiting for Sir Keir Starmer to come and make this speech, and not make the speech in a solitary way on his own with a podium, but actually with his whole team behind him, because it is a win for all of the Labour Party. They have been out of power for 14 years, and they today have won a majority. They were so nervous during this campaign, so worried that they might fall short, worried that they would slip up that the lead might disintegrate, but it just did not. The polls did not move. That 20-point poll lead that Labour had going into this campaign, they came out the other side, and the poll lead broadly was that their polls narrowed slightly in the closing days, but it was, if you like, as I've said before, in a way, it was almost a race that was run before it even started, because once Rishi Sunak kicked off the campaign with the rain and then the D-Day debacle and the betting scandal, he just really couldn't ever get out of the kind of Tory turmoil. And all that did was reinforce, I think, to the country memories of Partygate and sleaze and people not doing the right thing. And he could never get past that to talk about policy, really. And so Keir Starmer, having made quite modest promises to the British electorate, nevertheless has earned the right to govern. And I think the reason that he also did that was there has been a conscious effort within the Labour leadership team that they want to under-promise and over-deliver. And the reason that they say they want to do that is because they recognise that trust is broken in politics. The country feels let down by politicians. Labour is tarred with the same brush in that sense. And so they didn't want to make promises that then they couldn't deliver. I guess the question is whether once they get going, these first steps around various different policies, being it cutting NHS waiting lists, tackling small boats, tackling crime on streets, getting more teachers, growing the economy, setting up Great British Energy, some of the policies, more teachers, 6,500 more teachers in secondary schools. These are the first steps, but really they know they're going to have to accelerate through these first steps in order to try and give the sense in the country that things are changing under Labour. The one other thing I would say that I thought was interesting in the overnight programme last night was John MacDonald, of course, the former Shadow Chancellor and leading voice on the left of the party, said to me that in the next 6 to 12 months, Keir Starmer will have to adapt the programme. He will have to be more radical. He will have to bring in a new layer of change. It might involve redistribution, in John MacDonald's words. He was very clear that he believed Sir Keir Starmer would have to end the cap, the two-child cap on benefits, that was something in terms of making it a fairer society that he felt that Keir Starmer would have to do. And I think that gives you a sense of some of the pressure that Keir Starmer could come under. Now, he's got such a big majority, you could argue that he'd be able to ignore the left in his party. But if he does want to govern and bring people together, he might want to listen to them too. And I think these are going to be some of the issues that begin to bubble up as the months go by under a Starmer administration.
Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby there on a Downing Street that is getting ever more crowded as people await for the incoming Prime Minister.